I think you need to find what works for you, but I also know that your proverbial couch is not the place where you're going to find what works for you. What I tell people is you're not going to know exactly how this works until you do it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is right now where you are while you are listening to this podcast. I'm Curt Mercadante, the host of the Freedom Club podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And because it is Wednesday, at least when this is actually airing, it's time for our interview segment. And today I have a treat for you. I have someone who is known as the Nomad Capitalist. So his real name is Andrew Henderson. He's actually from Cleveland, Ohio. Long story short, and you'll hear it in today's podcast, he made a boatload of money, got sick of paying taxes. Now he travels from country to country. He's got multiple passports, and he likes to go, as he says, where he's treated best. And he has an entire company that counsels people to do the same. Kind of country hopping. They have multiple passports. They go from country to country. They lower their tax rates. They do it all legally. He's got a book called The Nomad Capitalist. We had a fascinating discussion, everything from medical tourism to the countries with kind of what he says are the best passports. We talk about taxation. We talk about the branding power that governments have and why people go from high tax places to low tax places, why some people stay in high tax places. It's a fascinating discussion. I really had a lot of fun with this. His website, by the way, is nomadcapitalist.com. You can find his book, Nomad Capitalist, on Amazon. And without further delay, here is my interview with Andrew Henderson, the Nomad Capitalist.
Welcome to the Freedom Club podcast, where we strive to pull you out of your life of quiet desperation, out of your comfort zone of misery, and propel you into a life of freedom and fulfillment. And now, here's your host for this journey, international speaker and coach, and serial entrepreneur, Curt Mercadante.
Well, I am here with Andrew Henderson, also known as the Nomad Capitalist. Andrew, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining us.
Hey, great to be with you. A great pleasure.
And this is the Freedom Club podcast. We talk about all things freedom, and freedom means different things to different people. And when I ask people what freedom means to them, some people talk politics, some people talk societal, some people talk about personal freedom in their own lives. And, Andrew, your entire career and what you're doing now, the Nomad Capitalist, is specifically about freedom, isn't it?
Freedom and prosperity, those are the two things that I believe are important. And it's funny, we'd mentioned briefly before, I had to go to the hospital today, nothing too serious, but had to go and get something taken care of last minute. And I'll tell you what, freedom, I was thinking about this just a couple hours ago, here in Kuala Lumpur at Prince Court Hospital, one of the top, if not the top medical tourism facility in the world. When you go to this place, it looks like you're in the, like some billionaire's private art gallery or something.
Really?
On a big scale. It's really impressive. And so I'm thinking to myself, you know what? This is what I have worked for very hard for my entire life since I was 19, but really since I was 9, selling stuff door to door. To be able to, when I have to go to the hospital, have the freedom that I don't have to wait around. I don't have to be miserable. I can go and as I say, go where you're treated best, and be able to receive care in an environment where I can do it on my terms. And so to me, that could apply, and doing things in your own terms applies to politics. We can talk about the fact that I was once a U.S. citizen and no longer a U.S. citizen. The freedom was to be able to go somewhere else and be a citizen of somewhere else. But I think it just applies to being able to do whatever you want to do, and to, as I say, go where you're treated best.
So it's interesting, and you're originally, we'll talk about this more, but you're from Cleveland, Ohio. You're currently in Kuala Lumpur. Interested when you bring up, we just had some dealings with our physician, and we're going through, we have 4 children, and even with a high deductible plan, we're at $1,700 a month for health insurance. And so you talk about medical tourism, and it's just, insurance, the medical system here in the U.S. has been on my mind a lot lately. So I'm intrigued by this. And so there's a lot of people opting for medical tourism. There's doctors here, I think, that are actually because they're so sick of the Medicare system, the insurance system, that they're going abroad or to the Caribbean to practice medicine where there's not so many rules. What's it, for someone who's heard the term medical tourism, some people in their minds might think, especially all right, in Kuala Lumpur, like you're going into a small hut somewhere with dirty equipment. It sounds like it's anything but.
It's anything but, and that's the interesting thing. The political view, by the way, is in the State Department in the U.S. just put something out that made me think of this today, which is they're still operating, all the Western world is still operating on the programming from the early 90s, which is when, and I give this example a lot, there's a movie, 1998, right after the Petronas Towers out my window were built, and you look around the Petronas Towers, it was a village. It is far from a village now. How many 50-story buildings do we need? They are everywhere. I cannot see the Petronas Towers 500 meters away from my apartment anymore.
Wow.
And so is it a hut? Absolutely not. It is. I'm just standing there waiting at the pharmacy for about 2 minutes to pick up my prescriptions after the doctor's visit. And I'm watching this kind of digital book next to the coffee bean and tea leaf, next to the, luxury, grocery store. I'm watching the little screen showing all the different procedures you can do. This equipment is like the most amazing equipment they have for whatever you need, whether it's cancer treatment, whether it's giving birth to a child. You can give birth to a child in a 1-bedroom junior suite. And it costs less than $2,000. That's what they're offering. You want a C-section? It's less than $3,000. And I'm looking at this and saying, I have never seen in my days in the United States, I never saw anything like this. These people are investing in the best. And I think that's the interesting thing is if you are the United States, if you are other Western countries, you get to kind of sit back and rest on your laurels, kind of like any established brand gets to, and say, hey, everyone wants to come to the US. But other countries have said, well, how do we overthrow or how do we unseat, the number one brand? Well, we've got to be better. And I think that's continuing to come to the forefront.
Well, it's interesting about in a true free market, right? Money flows like water. And when you obstruct it and someone else comes with a place where it's flowing more freely, that's where it's going to go. And I think people just simply do not realize that. And people who think that we do have actually a free market healthcare system here in the US, I think that went out the window with third-party payer, a half a century ago.
Yeah, I think, the biggest impediment that I see, and I talk about this so much, we can talk about this, is it's mindset. I'm a big fan. Even though, what he talks about is totally different than the world that I've lived in my entire life. I'm a big fan of the radio host Dave Ramsey and just kind of common sense financial advice. And, he talks about, much to the anathema of all the, finance geeks out there, most of this stuff is mindset. It is not head knowledge. It is not numbers. You're not in debt because you don't have a grasp on the numbers. If it was all a numbers game of, which interest rate should I pay, what highest interest rate gets paid out first, if you were that focused on numbers, you wouldn't be in debt. It's a behavior right. game. It's a mindset game. And I think that same thing applies here, where it is that sounds interesting. Yes, Kuala Lumpur statistically is better and the hospital's great and this and that, but they must be living in huts, right? Yeah. And it's this programming that people just can't get over. The strongest branding in the world is from governments. People are still moving to California. Plenty of beaches, plenty of beautiful women, plenty of everything that people are going to California for. Far cheaper, far lower taxes, far more opportunities. What? Because the Beach Boys had a song about it? How long does it take for this branding from governments to die? And the answer is a lot longer than it would in the business world. And I think that's what we are. That's what we're fighting against.
It's I think they have a 12% top income tax rate there in California. My family, we moved. I grew up, was born, raised. Actually, I wasn't born there, but I was raised in outside of Chicago. And Illinois is a state that is about to just implode into itself. I think on the low end, it's about $115 billion in pension debt, and they keep making it worse. But like you said, the government branding, right? Well, we're going to keep increasing the taxes and it's all for the kids and it's for the developmentally disabled. And I think I saw something where they rank something like 52nd in the country, 52nd, because they're behind Puerto Rico in the actual services they provide. But the branding they have is wonderful. And there's some people there who think, well, why would you ever move out of Illinois? We moved to South Carolina. And they said, well, at the time my wife was pregnant. Well, how are the facilities there? Right? It's like, oh, well, my wife's going to squat in a swamp and give birth.
I mean, listen, people come to, oh, Andrew, I love your content. I watch all your videos. I wish I could do what you do. I always love that, right? And I've heard that from people in my circle who are also traveling around and living overseas and taking advantage of the stuff we talk about. And so, it always starts with, I wish I could do it. Well, okay. I mean, that's like the first sign that you're making an excuse. I wish, right? Every great business was built with I wish and someone did something about it. But I wish I could do it, but I've got kids. Somehow I see a lot of kids walking around, right? They had to be born somewhere. They're not all dead, right? They are going to school. They are being educated. And they seem to grow up, some of them to become relatively successful or very successful. So it is this very provincial nature that we all have that is the issue. And unfortunately, I think in the political narrative right now is so much about identity politics that you can't even discuss this stuff anymore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I had a 7-figure agency and I was just totally unfulfilled with it. My dad died and I was like, what am I doing? And I didn't have a life of freedom where I could do what I want and control it. And it was somewhat the way I built my business, but also somewhat just the business I was in. And which we actually did a lot of political work and I just had to get out because it was, pox on everyone's houses. So, but when I shut it down, I had ex-clients who said he must be having a midlife crisis. Why else would you give something up to do it? And that's exactly what they said. They were all miserable in their jobs. And it was I wish I could do what you are doing, but I can't. It's like, well, why can't you? And they think it's right, a numbers and cents game or dollars and cents game or a numbers game. But really it is mindset and it's limiting beliefs. And it's like, just do it.
Good quote that I was reminded of today. Winners want to encourage people to win. And I'm privileged to do this. I work with a lot of folks who are newly successful. And I've been in business 15 years and been pretty fortunate. And so some of them aren't quite, where I'm at. And it's nice to mentor them. But it's always nice to get the guy who's 60, who's about to sell his business for $50 million, and to talk to him. And you know what I find? Winners want people to win. And we have such a culture now with social media and everything else where all the quote unquote losers who want people to lose get to have a very strong voice and people take them seriously. I think part of Go Where You're Treated Best is to be able to say, you know what, I want to be with winners because I want to win.
That's a great point. And that scarcity mindset is so prevalent. It's just prevalent in human nature. But I feel like in some cases it's getting worse when I put out a video about, I'm at the beach with my kids on a Wednesday afternoon, right? It's a work day. And immediately I get people who either don't believe me. Now, that's because there's a lot of charlatans out there who rent the Ferrari and rent the mansion and then do a video and say they're living the lifestyle, right? But there's other people who simply can't fathom that. I mean, I got comments like, well, you must have married rich. You must have inherited money.
Yeah, right.
But I always get questions or comments. Well, it's because of your privilege. You should acknowledge your privilege. And I know there's obvious political undertones behind that. But if you sit around each day worrying about other people's privilege and your lack thereof, and you don't get off the proverbial couch, you kind of deserve what you get, don't you?
Well, and listen, this is what I see, in my travels, having been in 100 countries, is that's how most of the world thinks. I mean, obviously, the majority of people in most places choose not to be successful, but there's more of an acceptance of that very philosophy around the world. The Western world has become very soft. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it goes back to this kind of provincial mindset in a different way, which is, if it's not in my circle or my sphere of understanding, it must not be possible. I remember someone sending me something a while back from one of these digital nomad forums. question, are there any digital nomads who are making $10,000 a month? Not in profit, I mean, heaven forbid, but in revenue. And I'm thinking, yeah, a lot of people. Yeah. And I'm not trying to pick on that person. I mean, certainly we've all had to, there was a time when I didn't think certain things were possible. There was a time when I didn't think $1 million in revenue or 2 million was possible. And you have to keep pushing through those barriers. But this idea that then you're going to weaponize that and say, well, if you're out there saying you're making $100,000 a month, you must be you just must be lying. This is the basis of everything that is wrong with the political undertones in the West, where someone else has to pay the bill for everything because you're just normal, and that other guy, if he's even legitimate, must have stolen it, inherited it, and must be taken and appropriated for your benefit. And I just think there's so much negativity around this right now. But I'll tell you this, I'd rather be the guy that they're coming after because, again, winners are always going to win. And you're going to find ways to go where you're treated best. And the people who have the scarcity mindset are always going to be there. So I'll take the winning and I'll take the blows. And that comes with the territory. But it's unfortunate.
So I this week in preparation for this, I spent a lot of time on your website, and I have to just first compliment you. I just love the flow of your website, and of course, as soon as I leave your website, I get barraged with ads on Facebook saying you were just on our website, targeting, but the flow is great, and I love. Well, there's a couple of things I want to get to, but I love let's first get to you, right? So let's start. You're from Cleveland, Ohio. You made a bunch of bucks. You were in the radio industry. You started to travel. You made some money, started to travel, and had this realization that you were flushing money down the toilet.
Well, yeah. I'll tell you what's funny about the ads. We have never done ads until about a month ago.
Really?
And because a couple months ago I met with a guy who was flushing a lot more money down the toilet than I did. And he's like, I kept finding your website. Like I would search for something, then I would go and do nothing. Then I'd come back and I'd find you. I kept finding you over and over. I'm like, why weren't you retargeting me? I would have saved more money. I would have hired you sooner. And so he kind of motivated me. But yeah, I grew up in Cleveland and moved to Arizona. And I remember starting out, I was about 20 years old back in the day. If you remember the Vonage phone, the VoIP phone.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because my approach for being successful was modeling what my father did, which is work hard. I would just pick up the phone and call everybody who had a paid radio show and say, hey, I have these stations over here who would like to sell you some airtime. How would you like to be on my stations and pay them? And so I was using this VoIP phone. And then one day I realized, I said, why couldn't I just plug this VoIP phone into the internet on an island somewhere and live there? And, as people often do when they're just getting started in business, I kept thinking about it, but it pushed aside because the goal was growing the business, not thinking about moving to an island. And then I started getting these increasing, tax bills because when you're a kid and you're a libertarian, taxes sound terrible, but it's all theoretical, which is meaningless.
Yeah.
When you're actually paying with your dollars, it means something. And eventually I started saying, well, you know what, let me just start exploring. And I immediately felt on a social level more comfortable. I immediately started noticing things that were better in the other places where I went. I'm not saying everything was better. I'm saying that I noticed, hey, this is better, or interest rates are higher, or whatever. And eventually I said, you know what, I want to be kind of a full-time traveler, or at least a large-time traveler. And I can use technology to do that. And by the time I made the decision to do it full-time, the business was at scale. And I was, just sending emails to people and clients and getting stuff done that way, Skype calls, whatever. And along the way, really started to get into the piece of reducing, figuring out how to reduce the tax, thinking, hey, I'm not living in the U.S. Why should I pay? And getting into this whole vortex of how offshore and tax and where you live and all that works. But I wish I would have done it a lot sooner. I wish I would have had someone to push me. I wish some of this information would have been readily available back in 2005, 6, 7, the way it is now, because I would have saved a 7-figure sum by moving faster. But here I am, nevertheless, better late than never.
So you've been in 100 countries. You start in Cleveland. You're now in Kuala Lumpur. What, uh, where has your journey taken you? Like, how do you determine where you're going to go next?
Well, now I've got what a lot of people don't realize, and which probably means I need to do better at communicating it. Is we've got about a dozen people now who are working, including full-time R&D people, strategy people, operations people. I'm increasingly putting the burden on them. I'm just going to live the life from a lifestyle perspective of where I go, and so when I was traveling, I took a largely shotgun approach because I think everything has some place to offer. I did have a certain kind of cutoff point where I realized that nobody's probably going to invest in Chad as much potential as Chad may have. I'm not saying Chad has potential. That's kind of just off the cuff. But I kind of figured, even if I'm writing a blog and reaching lots of people, no one's going to Chad. I have a hard enough time getting people to show up in Kuala Lumpur sometimes, or showing up in Tbilisi, or showing up in Mexico City, let alone Chad. But my goal was basically just to knock out one continent at a time, and I would bounce back and forth between continents. And my focus was largely on Europe and Asia, because I think that Europe offers certain lifestyle benefits, hiring benefits, certainly a cultural proximity to where we're from and where Westerners are from in many cases. Asia, because it's the century of Asia. Latin America, parts of it. I think Latin America more as a lifestyle destination. But I think Europe and Asia are kind of my main areas, and where I see a lot of the best opportunities.
And you mentioned lifestyle. I think what a lot of people do is they define their career first, and then they try to shoehorn that in, or they try to shoehorn their lifestyle into that, right? Rather than defining what they actually want their lifestyle to look like. And it probably goes back to that mindset we talked about of well, that's not even possible. And actually, a lot of my clients can't even sit down. I ask them to grab a piece of paper and a pen and just define, like, what do you really want your lifestyle to be like? And they can't even define it. And we're not even talking traveling around the world and going from country to country. We're talking about like taking Friday afternoons off, And so that lifestyle is so important. But you're more than just a lifestyle designer. You provide your clients with concrete tax, legal strategies, etc., to make it happen, right?
Well, that said, being the entrepreneur who's been in the pain of writing the big checks, being the person who has traveled, and being someone who likes to function both left brain and right brain, what I've seen is, going back to the Dave Ramsey thing, if you're not going to take, if you don't take the medicine, you'll never be cured. And so I can have the best tax plan in the world for somebody. If it doesn't suit their lifestyle, it won't matter. So to your point, I like to start the same way you start, which is start with the end in mind. What do you want your life to look like? What are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? Let's be honest. Let's cut the crap, right? I understand you watch my YouTube videos, but let's cut out like what you think I want you to do, and let's figure out what you really want to do. And let's figure out what that looks like, and then work backwards to figure out the easiest way to get to the objective, rather than saying, let's set up a company in the Seychelles and keep, clambering on one miserable step at a time from there, because that ultimately won't solve your problem. That said, I'm not a sit on the beach kind of guy. I'm, I guess you'd say, a workaholic. That's always been what I've done, is just outwork people. I enjoy it. Even when I think I'm not working, my fiance is like, "You're working." Your fun is just less miserable. It's just more fun work. And so for that kind of person, the person who works hard and makes a lot of money, the stakes are a lot higher. The risks are higher. The costs are higher. And if you're making $500,000 a year and living in California, you're probably paying $200 and some $1,000 in tax. And if you look at that over the next 10 years, you could reinvest that in an index fund and have $3 or $4 million. So, I think that for that person, lifestyle, it has to be a pill that you're able to take and willing to take. But we're not at that point just figuring out, which beach you want to be on. We're figuring out which beach you want to be on that has a favorable tax and immigration policy.
So you mentioned your fiance, you're engaged. Did you meet your fiance in the US or in your travels somewhere outside?
So we met. I was a non-U.S. person. So no, I mean, and she's a non-U.S. person.
Okay.
That's the IRS, how the IRS wants to think of us, right? Is we're either U.S. persons or we're not U.S. persons. No, she is Russian,
Okay.
and we helped her get her Armenian passport as well. She has ancestry from there. No, we actually met when I was traveling through Moscow. But I think that's just kind of another example of go where you're treated best, because for all the folks in the U.S. that I talk to who are frustrated with the dating scene, I think that you go to different places, you get a somewhat different animal. People are people, but there's certainly different cultures, and I think that's what we're talking about here: is leveraging the best, leveraging what serves you.
It's interesting, kind of back to the branding, the government branding idea, right? And we had, my kind of break toward freedom, and it's still a work in progress, as it should be. Happened about 2 years ago when I shut down my agency, and now I coach, I speak, I'm traveling. My wife and I, back when I had money, we kept saying, we were engaged. We got engaged on the fake Grand Canal at the Venetian Resort in Vegas, right? And so we immediately said, we're going back next year. We're going to not going back. We're going to the real Grand Canal. And we kept telling ourselves that. And I made more and more money, but I had that scarcity mindset where I didn't have enough, and I couldn't. So I shut down my agency, right? I cut my income. Now it's moving back up, obviously, but then and only then we decided to go to Europe. We went for 6 weeks last year. And it's interesting that, especially, in the post 9/11 world, which I can't believe it was that long ago already, the amount of people who said, "Oh, I would never go to Europe. It's so dangerous. Going over there, you're taking your life into your hands." And it's so interesting. We get there, and you know what they say? "Oh, the United States, it's so dangerous. People are getting gunned down in the streets." Yeah. And I don't think people realize they have this fear that, they watch maybe movies like Taken with Liam Neeson, and they think everyone's just getting snatched off the streets, where here, there was a case here in South Carolina where that actually happened to a college student recently. Through all your travels, I guess you've mentioned some places. You've gone through Moscow, you mentioned Tbilisi, you mentioned Latin America. Where are the sort of, for a family, let's say, because you deal with entrepreneurs with families, you deal with people who don't have families. For a family, where's some places that you would recommend that they should go, that maybe they don't think right now? If you mentioned it off the top of their head, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'd never go there. We're taking our lives into our hands."
Well, I think, one thing I've done is I've put together with our team, a library of, 400 different questions we've asked various people, that when someone comes, we pull from that library, and then we'll generate some custom questions. And so, do you like the big city? Do you not like the big city? Is one thing. What kind of climate do you like? Most people seem to like a warmer climate, but occasionally you get someone who says, "I don't want warm. I don't want anything too tropical." To your point of safety, had a guy come. He was a big affiliate marketer, and he says, "Hey, a bunch of us, $1 million earners, went to Barcelona for a conference. Guy's wearing a brand new Patek Philippe watch, and this gang just encircles him. One guy rips it off his wrist. The rest of them stop them from chasing after him, and there goes the $50,000 watch." They told this story to me when we were together in Tbilisi, in Georgia, where I literally have a collection of stories of people who said the taxi driver returned my $5,000 Leica camera to me, and he hunted me down to return it to me. And that's just what the culture is. So if you're a family and that kind of thing is important to you, I think it's places that you wouldn't suspect. Georgia is one of the top places to start a business. There are certainly challenges that you will not be aware of. It is an entirely different culture. But it is an entirely different culture. But it is also one of the safest countries in the world. Listen, if you want a consumer paradise and you want warm weather and you're willing to deal with some of the cultural restrictions, a place like Dubai could be a great place. You're going to live tax-free. I think that Kuala Lumpur is a great place. The other question is, what's your paradigm on school? I almost think that having a network of tutors and letting kids learn on their own is maybe better than putting them in some kind of stuffy international school.
Sure.
But maybe you don't agree with me. And so I think those are all questions that have to be asked. But what I would say is, people who get, people who do what others aren't willing to do get what others don't get. And I think that if you're willing to look at, for example, the Tbilisi, you will find that you're going to be a lot safer in that kind of place than you are in the places that you think are safe.
Maybe even Chicago, right?
One of the unsafest, one of the least safe cities in the developed world, in part. And people, but I live. I've got a friend. I live in Naperville, and that's not Chicago. Well, yeah, but that's everywhere.
Right. It's funny that you say that's where I grew up, Naperville. So when you look at the various tax strategies, legal strategies, how many different countries are there kind of in your matrix that makes sense for a person when you take into account the lifestyle they want to live, right? Now I could put that together and say, well, I want to live here. And you're like, no, you don't want to live there because they're going to tax you with this. There's legal strategies. How many countries do you have in your list, in your bag of tricks, right, that fit people's life, that fit a lifestyle, but also save you money from a nomad capitalist point of view?
It's an interesting question. How many countries are there in the bag of tricks and that we have data sheets on and we've studied? I don't know. I mean, 60 maybe, from the perspective that you might not want to live somewhere full time. I talk about the trifecta approach where it says, all right, I'll split my time between these two places. And if we just tweak that just enough, we can do so in a way with the proper, planning and all that to where, you're going to live in those two places. If it's just, hey, I want to go and live there full time and have a pretty good tax situation, let's call it from 0 to 10%, it might be 20. And again, it's also going to depend on, what's your income. I mean, so if you're making $1 million a year, then the list of places, you can go to Gibraltar, for example, and pay a flat fee, basically. And that's going to be 3 or 4% of your income, which obviously that's not going to work. If you're making $100,000 a year, you might as well just stay in the United States. But it's dozens of countries, and I don't want to. I don't want to make it sound like there's no straight answer, but in a sense, I'm not living in one place. So my situation is different from the family who says, we just want to find a home.
It's especially during the election years, there is this notion of, well, the United States is the home of the free, right? Or land of the free, home of the brave, right? Land of the free. And they will dump on other countries, specifically European countries. Now, granted, there are some European countries that are heavily socialist, et cetera, right? But they'll do is point to one piece, for instance, the income tax. But then I'll look on, there's various rankings of the freest countries in the world. And some of them are ones that you would think, well, what? How are those free? But when you look at it, right, some of those countries are the size of South Carolina. They don't have 60 different, I think in Illinois, I want to say there's 1,100 different units of government. And so, yeah, you may be paying a 40% tax rate, but you're also not paying the township tax and the library tax and the park district tax. You're not paying for a legal system that adds, a certain tax of, thousands per year per family. And when you look at it, when you compare all the various taxes, state, local, water tax, phone tax, whatever it is in the US, I mean, depending on the state you're in, I mean, you may be looking at 85, 90% of your income. Whereas in even in a European country where they have a 45% tax rate, you might actually get a tax cut when you go there.
I'm not here to defend, government intervention and stuff that should be part of the free market. But let's be honest. If you're that guy who's the millionaire living in California paying 13.3%, the upper bracket, and you're paying Social Security, which, by the way, these people who want to get into power, that they want to lift the cap so badly to where it's going to become a welfare program rather than allegedly a defined benefit program where you make $10 million a year and you just pay 1 point, whatever million into Social Security and then get $1,000 a month back when you retire. Right. So you're paying, 15.3 or 16.3 med FICA if you're self-employed. You're paying California. You're paying the feds. I always love, by the way, these great tax breaks. Trump, and before that it was Bush. What goes from 39 to 35, and they're heralded as the great heroes of the modern age for lowering taxes. But anyway, the point is, if you're paying all that money, what are you getting for that? You're getting roads. Well, okay, you pay a fuel tax for that. You're paying a car registration tax for that. What are you getting? At least in Europe, they have a hospital for you. And I'm not. Listen, I mean, I'm voting with my feet. I'll gladly go to Prince Court and I'll pay out of pocket. I have insurance if I get hit by a bus. For everything else, I pay out of pocket. Happy to pay. Happy to pay user fees in the places where I live. So I don't want to be in that system. But at least you're getting something in some of these countries. And so, listen, it's the lowest form of politics to just make tax against other people. But the best thing about democracy is that the average person is an idiot and doesn't know any different. And that's what politicians play into. You can say, I work with very intelligent people, and I'll mention a country sometimes, and they're like, let me get my map and see where that is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
These are intelligent people who are successful, who are smart. They went to the best schools. You think the average person voting for this brand new mayor in Chicago, that's the one thing I've heard from Illinois, by the way. Not that they're broke, but that they've got this new transformative mayor who's going to be great, right? And so those people don't know any different.
No, absolutely not. And an interesting piece is when you talk about, the same people that will sit on the couch and fire off 8 angry Facebook posts about some political issue or about some policy. They haven't read the story, but they don't actually know the policy. But because it was proposed or espoused by their politician, insert political party, right? They're for it and they're patriotic all of a sudden. And I saw something recently that the majority of people, I think it was here in South Carolina, can't even pass the U.S. citizenship test.
Oh no. No.
And a lot of those people will sit here and they'll listen. And some people who make money, right, will listen and they'll hear what you said about being a non-U.S. person or not having a U.S. passport or whatever. And to them, that is an impediment for them, right? Because it's very rah-rah. I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born here. What do you say to someone like that? Or someone who has, really wants to do what you did. And you have said, what I liked about your website is you have some very clear, listen, if you're someone who's just angry at America, if you're someone who's just, I can't find an American man or woman to date, something like that, doesn't equal that problem or the pain that you're having. They might not be the right fit. But if you have someone who does, checks all the other boxes, but does have a concern about, I grew up in the U.S. and I'm a patriotic person. I'm sure you deal with that from time to time. I mean, how do you deal with that?
Well, to the average, so there's a couple things. I mean, you mentioned just kind of the average person who's posting on Facebook who's angry. What do I say to them? I say nothing. I don't value their opinion. And what I learned very early in life, I remember coming down the stairs because the plain dealer in Cleveland insulted what they called the gifted programs at the time as being a bunch of spoiled brats. And I told my dad, this is very uncomfortable. I don't want to be called a spoiled brat. And he says, well, if you're going to be successful in life, you better get used to it because everyone's gunning for you when you're successful. And so I always remembered that. And so I don't really care what the average person says. What I'll say to the people who come to me, I'm not telling anyone to renounce their U.S. citizenship. There are times when that's really the only solution to what they want to accomplish. That's not that frequent. What I would say is keep an open mind to what's the best option. And sometimes what will happen is someone will go out there, got a guy who started with us 3 years ago. He's been out there. He's been traveling. He's been doing everything. He says, you know what? I realize I don't want the U.S. in my life anymore. And if that's what happens, whether it's a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years later, that's fine. Again, it has to work for you. And if it never, if you just take advantage of as much, tax optimization as possible, lifestyle optimization, wealth creation as a U.S. person, that's fine too. I'm not here to tell people what to do. Obviously, we have to work within the laws. I don't make the laws. I just work within them. And so I think you need to find what works for you. But I also know that your proverbial couch is not the place where you're going to find what works for you. What I tell people is you're not going to know exactly how this works until you do it. You're not going to, you can do what I did. I mean, I've spent 12 years to get where I'm at. I could probably get someone to where I'm at in about a year. Not emotionally, but structurally. I could get them there in 1/12 the time. You can do it either way. You can do the short way or the slow way, but you're going to have to do it to learn how it works. And I think as you learn how it works, my last 12 years of my life has been a study in ever-changing understandings of how the world works and what I want from it.
You, from a business building perspective, I mean, you say you're a workaholic, but I can tell just by little things. For instance, your message on Skype about only being there on Tuesdays, and you mentioned the team that you have in place, and you're pushing more on them so you can focus more on the lifestyle that you want to live.
Yeah.
What are some key strategies you put in place to help you? A lot of people judge their days on inputs, right? And so they fill their day with an ever increasing amount of to-dos and tasks. And at the end of the day, when you ask them, what did you achieve? Oh, I was real productive. I got my to-do list done. It's like, well, that's not actual productivity. Productivity, like what outcomes did you get? And don't make the outcomes the inputs. And if it's 60 things, you're not being productive. What things do you put in place or strategies do you put in place to keep you focused on outcomes and keep you productive?
Well, the number one thing that you mentioned there that's correct is results matter. That's all that matters. I set up an offshore company, but now I can't figure out how to use it for the next year. So you didn't obtain your benefit, which was tax reduction. It's nice that you had the shiny doodad, but the result's all that matters. I think, honestly, that is kind of an Anglo concept. That's one thing that if you go to, with all due respect, you go to Germany, people don't entirely get what I do. They're like, well, why don't we just have a discussion about it? It's like, why don't you do it? But specifically, I think it's a very different thing between the Anglo world and some of the older world places. I was just talking to a friend of mine about this. It's really why I don't really work with that many Europeans and we don't accept most nationalities. It's just not that I don't want to help them. It's just we have a different way of approaching things. And I think my way works. And for the right people, it's very transformative. So I think that making sure that you're with people who are a fit. I don't want to run a business where I'm clutching for any dollar. I want dollars that are a fit because those are dollars that value is being delivered to. To your question, why am I only on Skype on Tuesdays? What I've done is I've set up structure. I think far too often entrepreneurs say that structure is the enemy. I'm there on Tuesdays because I batch things, I get it done, and then I go and do other things that are batched on other days. Why am I focusing more on lifestyle with building a team? I'm not entirely. I'm focused on lifestyle in terms of where I'm living and not having to fly to Albania at the last minute. But what I'm doing is I'm realizing what I'm good at. And what I've realized is I'm a bit more of the creative type than I ever gave myself credit for. So I'm batching a lot of the, business stuff to people I've trained to handle business stuff. And I'm focusing on, now that that's off my plate, what are we doing on a creative level? What are we doing on an R&D level? I think that early in the business, too much I focused on running a business, and now we're focused a lot more on R&D and what are the opportunities, which ultimately leads to a more dynamic business. So I think structure is one of the big things that I think entrepreneurs should find important. And to that point, if you're hiring a team, understand that they're not entrepreneurs. They need structure. They crave structure. The idea that I had at 21 years old of, I don't care when you worked as long as the job gets done, often results in the job not getting done. And I think even for us as the entrepreneurs, sometimes a lack of structure can be painful, which is why I batch stuff. It's why I do my calls with various mentors at certain times, Thursday, 5 to 7, never moves. Because structure works.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't understand, because I made this mistake coming out. I yelled freedom and said, I'm just going to take every day as it comes. And without that structure, I didn't have freedom. I had noise.
And having the structure say, so for my team, and I'm a bit more free flowing than this, but for my team, we have a waterfall. You come in and you devote up to this amount of time to this thing, then you move on to the next thing, then you move on to the next thing, and it may take less time. If it takes more time, then it sits. So I think that you have to find the level of structure that works for you. But just this thing of just everything being ad hoc, to a certain extent, morphs into the fact that the wealthier people that I see are the ones who want to live in one place and just be tax optimized, because they're like, I need a structure where I'm not having the distraction of always traveling somewhere. I don't want to do a visa run every 30 days. I don't need that, because I'm running a $50 million company. Whereas someone running a $500,000 company hasn't quite figured that part out yet, and that's okay. But I think the structure does work.
So someone's sitting here listening, they make whatever amount of money, right? Yeah. And they're like, I'm in. Or at least I think I'm in. I think I want to be in. And I want to get in. I want to get in touch with Andrew. How does that flow work? From I go to your website and I click on work with Andrew or apply. Mm-hmm. How does that all work in terms of someone who wants to work with you?
Well, I might take a step back, and I might say, since you mentioned people who have different goals, I might go and start with the book. I read a book, Nomad Capitalist. I don't talk about it nearly enough, so I'm trying to talk about it more. I do things, and then I'm like, oh, I've done it, so it's off the list, and then I never promote anything. But I read a book, and I think a lot of people who have read it come more prepared, and they understand what's possible, what's not possible. They realize the stuff they see on the, I'm watching The Blacklist on Netflix now, and they talk about offshore havens, and it's all gobbledygook and totally wrong. And so the book would straighten you out. So maybe you decide you're either more enthused or, oh, I can't just live in the United States and run my business from there and pay no tax. Once you come and you do want to work with us, we have this application that I've created. I know that like so many things I've done in life, it's a very popular thing to have an application now. Ours was designed to actually gather information, not just to BS people. And so it's going to try and get you in touch with, why are you here? I'll tell you this. My father recently reached out for help, and I said, great, I have an application. Because the application is not a punishment. It is designed to center you. And I can tell you, ran into a guy at Starbucks a couple weeks ago who said, hey, Andrew, appreciate your videos. Here visiting. Probably not ready for it yet. And you know what? I went through the application and I realized, I didn't want to take it seriously. And so he's out. And now he's traveling, and maybe in a year or whatever, he'll be ready to go. But right now he's not ready to go. And so you fill an application. If we can help you, then we chat. If we chat and we can help you and we want to help you, then, here's the offer. My thing that I'm a big believer in is you got to make a decision. And so if we chat, you'll decide yes or no, and either one's okay. Really, my whole thing is about guiding people towards binary decisions, because so many decisions are binary, but yet we like to live in a panacea of options where it's perpetual option collecting. And what I've seen in my own life, people around me and people who come to me, is that doesn't really work for a transformative effect.
So I want to ask you let us know where everyone can. I was still processing what you just said. What if people want to work with you? Your website. You mentioned the book, which I didn't even know you had a book.
This is my problem.
Where can they find that book?
So we published the book on Amazon. It's called Nomad Capitalist. I'm looking at the copy across the room, but basically, how to use offshore companies and second passports and create wealth overseas. But it's called Nomad Capitalist. You can find it on Amazon for, whatever books sell for on Amazon, $7 or whatever. And that's a good place to start because it's a real book. My dream since I was 6 years old was to write a book. And so I spent about 2 years writing a book. and editing the book, which is much worse than writing the book, is editing the book, and taking out, showing it to people, and you shouldn't say that. So that's a good first step. And I'll tell you, we've had a lot of people who have come, maybe not a lot, but a good percentage of people who have come recently who have read the book, and it was a great foundation. Whether they work with me or not, you might just figure out, hey, that piece about the dating life I'm frustrated with. Okay, I speak to that, and maybe that's all you take from it. But
and do you, when you work with someone, do you like hop on weekly calls? Is it more of a, we put together a roadmap, give it to you, and say goodbye?
So there's two processes that I've found. So again, all of this is really based on me figuring out what's worked for me, because I'm also the consumer.
Sure.
Which I think is unique, because KPMG, it's like they're like the 15-year-old libertarian me. It's not their money. It's like monopoly money to them. And so the first thing is we need a plan, and that's where the 400 questions and all that comes into play. And once we figure out the plan, then we can go and execute the plan, which is where my Rolodex, to use a term like I'm 80 years old, comes into play, where we can say, all right, we'll general contract. You have a U.S. accountant who doesn't think you can go offshore, so we're going to replace him with an expat-focused accountant. But then he doesn't know how to talk to the guy over in Mauritius, or you're going to live in, Thailand, so they don't know how to talk. So we're going to basically make sure that they all do the right stuff, so that what happens in Thailand doesn't screw up your U.S. tax return. But before we even get to that, we need to figure out what the steps are. What is it you need? What is it you don't need? What is it you want? And I think a lot of times people will come and say, I need a second passport. Why? Because I have to renounce my citizenship. Why? Because I thought that's what I had to do. No, that's an option. Or I thought I needed a second citizenship because if I have a second citizenship, that's my shield against paying U.S. tax. Well, not if you're a U.S. citizen. You're still subject to being a U.S. citizen. So part of that process of figuring out the plan is, what are some of the misconceptions, and then going through what it is that you want your life and your results to look like. And then once that is had, if you want to do it on your own, that's cool. But my thing is, let's light a fire on it. Let's get it done quickly. Let's get it done correctly, and just plug in. And then once that's done, the goal is to build it for the long haul. People think, oh, every 6 months I need to tweak it. No, not if you do it right.
So the website is nomadcapitalist.com. The book is on Amazon. We have a Facebook community. It's nearing 1,000 people, called the Freedom Club Community. We're going to give away a free copy of your book to someone within the community. So if you're listening to this podcast and you are not a member of the Freedom Club community, we give away goodies like that. A lot of times we'll live stream these interviews in that community. So please take advantage of it. Go to Facebook, search for Freedom Club Community. You'll see my ugly mug. Click on it, apply to join. We'll get you in there, all that cool stuff. And with that, Andrew, I'd like to give you the final word. Anything we haven't covered that you think people should know, they want to know, questions I haven't asked you that you think should, your answer should burnish in their mind as they leave this podcast?
What I've learned is we need to hear things again and again. I think that we need to make it simple. This is the politician's secret, right? What I've really learned is, if you think, go where you're treated best, and you think objectively at every encounter, this is the natural state, is to go where we're treated best. This is why people, have often engaged in illegal tax evasion. They live in the U.S., they hide their money in the basement, whatever, because they don't want to pay. The natural state is we want to keep more of our own money. We want to become wealthier. We want to seek freedom. We want to live a life we love, take care of our families, etc. That's the natural state. Obviously, we don't want to be doing things illegally. We want to do things legally for our own benefit, and it's the right thing to do. But go where you're treated best. And so if you ask yourself, is this thing, am I going where I'm treated best? I'm going to the Chase Bank, in South Carolina to open an account. Is this where I'm treated best? Is it the best service? Is it the best stability? Is it the best everything? If the answer is no, ask yourself, where can I be treated best? Where is that place? And I think if we start asking ourselves that question and framing it that way, we'll probably find there's a lot of room for improvement, and we can go from there.
Well, Andrew, the Nomad Capitalist, I appreciate you coming on the Freedom Club podcast. And I hope our listeners got great value out of this. Anyone wants to learn more, go to Amazon, get the book, go to nomadcapitalist.com. Andrew, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.